24 Hz, the cinema standard. Every movie you've ever watched in a theater was shot at 24 frames per second. Every Hollywood blockbuster, every Netflix film, every cinematic production, 24 frames per second. And this is where most people get confused between frame rate and refresh rate. Frame rate is how many pictures per second the movie was filmed at. Refresh rate is how many times per second your TV redraws the image on screen. So when you watch a 24 frames per second movie on a 60 Hz TV, the TV has to figure out how to show 24 frames across 60 refresh cycles. The problem? 24 doesn't divide evenly into 60. The TV uses something called 3-2 pull-down. Some frames get shown for 3 refresh cycles, others for 2. This creates judder, that stuttery, jerky motion you see during slow camera pans in movies. If you've ever noticed that uneven motion during a sweeping landscape shot, that's judder. Now here's the fix. A 120 Hz TV handles 24 frames per second perfectly. Why? Because 24 divides evenly into 120. Each movie frame gets displayed exactly 5 times. No judder, no stutter, just smooth, cinematic motion exactly as the director intended. If you're a movie lover who watches a lot of films, a 120 Hz TV will give you the cleanest, most authentic viewing experience. Period. 30 Hz, the broadcast standard. 30 frames per second is everywhere in television. Live news broadcasts, reality TV shows, talk shows, older YouTube videos. Most broadcast television content runs at 30 frames per second. The good news? Almost every modern TV is at least 60 Hz, and 30 divides perfectly into 60. Each frame gets shown twice, no problems, no judder. Everything works smoothly. If you're watching 30 frames per second content on a 120 Hz TV, each frame gets repeated 4 times. Still smooth, still clean. Bottom line for casual TV watchers, 30 frames per second content works perfectly on any modern TV. You don't need to worry about this one. 50 Hz, the European standard. If you live in Europe, the UK, Australia, Asia, or most of Africa, you've probably encountered 50 Hz content. Those regions use a different electrical system, and their TV broadcasts run at 25 frames per second instead of 30. Sports broadcasts, local TV shows, and regional content are often shot at 25 frames per second. A 50 Hz TV refreshes 50 times per second, which matches 25 frames per second content perfectly. Each frame shows twice. But here's the problem. A 50 Hz TV struggles with 24 frames per second movies and 60 frames per second gaming. That's why most modern TVs in these regions are now 100 Hz or 120 Hz. They can handle both local broadcasts at 25 frames per second and international content at 24 or 60 frames per second. If you live in Europe, the UK, or Australia, look for a 100 Hz or 120 Hz TV. It'll handle everything smoothly. 60 Hz, the standard workhorse. 60 Hz has been the default TV refresh rate for decades, and it's still the most common refresh rate on budget and mid-range TVs today. A 60 Hz TV works great for 60 frames per second sports broadcasts, 30 frames per second TV shows, and gaming on older consoles like PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. But 60 Hz has 3 major limitations. First, movie judder. As we talked about earlier, 20 frames per second movies don't divide evenly into 60 Hz. You get that stuttery motion during slow pans. Second, gaming limitations. The PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X can output 120 frames per second in supported games, but a 60 Hz TV can't display it. You're capped at 60 frames per second, leaving half your console's performance on the table. Third, motion blur. Because each frame is held for about 17 milliseconds, fast-moving objects look blurry. Sports, action movies, fast-paced games, they all suffer from motion blur on 60 Hz displays. For casual viewers who watch cable TV and Netflix on older consoles, 60 Hz is fine. But if you're upgrading to a PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X, or if you care about movie quality, it's time to move on. 100 Hz, the European upgrade. 100 Hz TVs are primarily sold in Europe and other regions that use 25 frames per second broadcasts. A 100 Hz TV handles 25 frames per second content perfectly because 25 divides evenly into 100. Each frame shows 4 times. It also handles 50 frames per second sports smoothly. For movies at 24 frames per second, 100 Hz doesn't divide perfectly. But it's close enough that most TVs use software to smooth out any judder. Here's the catch for gamers. 100 Hz doesn't align with the 120 frames per second output of PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. If you're serious about next-gen gaming, you want 120Hz, not 100Hz. If you live in Europe or the UK and you prioritize watching local TV and movies over gaming, 100Hz is a solid choice. But for gamers, skip it and go straight to 120Hz. 120Hz, the modern sweet spot. 120Hz is the gold standard for TVs in 2025, and here's why. First, perfect movie playback. 24 frames per second divides evenly into 120. Each movie frame shows exactly 5 times. No judder, no stutter, just smooth cinematic motion. Second, next-gen gaming. PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X support 120 frames per second in games like Call of Duty, Fortnite, Apex Legends, and Rocket League. A 120Hz TV lets you see every single frame. Smoother motion, faster response, a genuine competitive advantage. Third, sports and fast action. 120Hz cuts motion blur in half compared to 60Hz. Each frame is held for only 8 milliseconds instead of 17. Fast camera pans, sports broadcasts, and action scenes look dramatically clearer. Fourth, HDMI 2.1 support. Most 120Hz TVs come with HDMI 2.1, which enables 4K at 120Hz, variable refresh rate, and auto low latency mode. These features eliminate screen tearing and reduce input lag for gaming. Fifth, future-proofing. As more content moves toward higher frame rates, a 120Hz TV ensures you're ready. If you're buying a TV in 2025, 120Hz is the minimum you should consider for gaming, movies, and sports. This is the sweet spot. 144Hz, the PC gaming crossover. 144Hz TVs are rare. Samsung makes a few high-end models, but that's about it. 144Hz comes from PC gaming monitors, where it's been the standard for years. It offers slightly smoother motion than 120Hz, but the difference is small. Here's the problem. Consoles don't support 144Hz. PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X max out at 120Hz. So unless you're connecting a high-end gaming PC to your TV, 144Hz offers no advantage over 120Hz. If you're a PC gamer with a powerful graphics card, 144Hz can deliver incredibly smooth gameplay in competitive titles like Valorant, Counter-Strike, and Overwatch. For console gamers, skip 144Hz. Stick with 120Hz and save your money. 240Hz, the overkill tier. 240Hz TVs are the bleeding edge of display technology, and they're marketed almost exclusively to hardcore PC gamers. At 240Hz, the TV refreshes the image 240 times per second. Motion is incredibly smooth, and input lag is minimized to near instantaneous levels. But here's reality. Consoles don't support it. PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X max out at 120Hz. Content doesn't exist for it. No movies, TV shows, or streaming services output 240 frames per second. You need an absolute beast of a gaming PC. To actually use 240Hz, your PC needs to push 240 frames per second, which requires a top-tier graphics card and low graphics settings in most games. And here's the kicker. Diminishing returns. The jump from 60Hz to 120Hz is massive. You can see it immediately. The jump from 120Hz to 240Hz, most people can't even tell the difference. 240Hz is overkill for 99% of users, unless you're a professional esports player or you have money to burn. Save your cash. The marketing scam. Motion rate versus real refresh rate. Here's where TV manufacturers get shady. You walk into a store and see a TV with a sticker that says 240 motion rate, or True Motion 240, or Motion Flow 960. Sounds impressive, right? It's fake. TV brands like Samsung, LG, and Sony use marketing terms to inflate the perceived refresh rate. They take the real refresh rate and multiply it by 2, 4, or even more using software tricks. So a TV with 240 motion rate is usually just a 60Hz panel with software smoothing. A 480 motion flow TV is probably 120Hz with aggressive interpolation. Here's how to find the real refresh rate. Number 1. Ignore the marketing terms. Motion rate, true motion, and motion flow are meaningless. Number 2. Check the specs. Look for native refresh rate or panel refresh rate in the manual or online specs. Number 3. Look for HDMI 2.1 Hz panel. Don't trust the sticker. Do your research. Let's make this simple. If you're a casual viewer who watches Netflix, cable TV, and occasional movies, 60Hz is fine. You'll save money and won't notice the difference. If you're a movie enthusiast who cares about cinematic quality, 120Hz. It eliminates judder and delivers smooth, authentic film playback. If you're a console gamer with a PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X, 120Hz with HDMI 2.1. This unlocks 120 frames per second gaming, variable refresh rate, and low input lag. If you're a PC gamer with a high-end rig, 144Hz or 240Hz, but only if your graphics card can actually push those frame rates. If you watch a lot of sports or fast action content, 120Hz. The reduced motion blur makes a huge difference. Refresh rate isn't just a spec. It's the difference between a smooth, immersive experience and a blurry, stuttery mess. 24 frames per second content needs 120Hz for perfect playback. 60Hz is the bare minimum for casual use. 120Hz is the sweet spot for gaming, movies, and sports. And anything above 144Hz is overkill unless you're a competitive PC gamer. And remember, ignore the marketing lies. Motion rate, true motion, and motion flow are fake numbers designed to trick you. Always check the native refresh rate. If you found this helpful, hit the like button. And if you want more videos breaking down confusing tech specs in simple terms, subscribe. Now, while we're on the topic of TV specs that sound complicated but actually aren't, let's talk about panel types. You know those letters you see everywhere? OLED, QLED, Mini LED, LCD? Most people have no idea what they mean or why they matter. In the next video, I'll explain every panel type in the simplest way possible. What each one does, which one's best for your needs, and which marketing terms are just hype. Click the video on screen right now, and I'll see you there.